Today we have a look inside walls that very few civilians have ever stepped foot in, rich with history, tragedy, and secrets. This is the story of TAMS. In 1992, Illinois was faced with overcrowding in its prisons, and a task force was created to figure out how to efficiently house the growing number of prisoners without burdening taxpayers. The main goal was to actually reduce the prison population. Initially, they planned on potentially renovating an abandoned school into a central prison unit in St. Louis, but the government had major concerns. The government was concerned that the creation of a central unit prison would lead to abuse, primarily of people of color. The government was also concerned that taxpayer money would be much better spent on things such as schools and social programs, especially since those things could potentially prevent people from entering the justice system to begin with, thus decreasing the prison population, which was the initial goal of the task force. The task force argued that creating a new central unit does nothing to further its goals, as it would have no impact on the size of the prison population whatsoever. Proponents of the central unit did everything in their power to drown out any criticisms, and the plans for a central unit prison went forward. Small towns desperate for new jobs and an economy boost bid against each other for the prison to be built within their jurisdiction. Eventually, the town of Tams was chosen to house the facility, and plans to build the prison began. The prison would eventually open its doors 6 years later in 1998. As the title of Supermax implies, this prison was not about rehabilitation and reform, but about punishment and deterring others. Most people who entered Tams would never leave, and would go the rest of their lives without seeing any sunlight whatsoever. Prisoners spent 22 to 24 hours a day alone in their concrete cells with a single tiny window that was too tall to even look out and no way to communicate with other human beings. The cells were made of concrete and steel, and the doors were made with thick mesh metal that made it impossible to look out. The materials used were purposely chosen to make communication between prisoners impossible and to make life as uncomfortable as possible. There were also plexiglass shields that guards could place over an individual cell so that the prisoner would be left with nothing but deafening silence. To further isolate prisoners, the doors to the cells, hallways, and everything else were controlled remotely and electronically from a variety of control rooms so that prisoners never even came into contact with guards. Each wing had its own medical unit as well, cutting down on the opportunity prisoners would have to leave their own wing, let alone the prison itself. There was technically a yard that was 12 feet by 30 feet, which is smaller than your average studio apartment. The ceiling in the yard was mostly steel mesh and plates, making it functionally useless as prisoners weren't really getting any sunshine or fresh air. Prisoners were not allowed water during their time in the yard, no matter how hot it was outside. If a prisoner asked for water, their time in the yard was finished, and they went back to their cell. During the rare times prisoners were allowed no-contact visits, they were put in a tiny room, once again, activated by electronics, and handcuffed to the chair for the duration of their visit. Something else notable was that no matter the reason for leaving their cell, aside from showering or going to the yard, prisoners were strip-searched and probed for no reason. It was also fairly common for guards to pepper spray and assault prisoners when they needed to bring the prisoners somewhere the electronic doors could not. Prisoners were not allowed to leave their cells without being handcuffed either, and were cuffed through the bars. Prisoners were often chained to the wall while guards did their searches, and basically had no bodily autonomy outside of their cell. TAM sounds like an absolute nightmare, but should it be? What were the types of people living inside? Some of the prisoners are simply ones that had issues in other prisons, whether that be something as simple as constantly fighting with other prisoners, or something as insane as escaping the last prison they were being held at. These prisoners were less likely to be there for life, and were at TAMS because they were there for an extra layer of security so that they wouldn't get out or cause fights, not because of the severity of their crime. This is disconcerting as the crimes they may have committed may not warrant even a fraction of what they had to endure inside the prison. They are also able to detain anyone they think would be a threat in a normal prison, such as a gang member. However, very little scrutiny was used, and this could be used to essentially transfer anyone to TAMS at the warden's discretion. Prisoners were often not given proper hearings for their transfer to TAMS, and the evidence used against them was often deemed secret, which made it impossible for the prisoners to challenge the transfer. Because the policies were ambiguous, wardens had free rein to move prisoners wherever they liked with next to no evidence because there was no standard for the evidence whatsoever. Prisoners could go decades without an infraction and still randomly be transferred to TAMS just because the wardens felt like it. It was nearly impossible to appeal something once at TAMS as well, given that there is next to no contact with anyone, including guards, outside the prison, and the little contact they had was, like I said, unpleasant. Once transferred, regardless of reason, prisoners had to stay at TAMS for at least 1 year minimum before being released or being transferred again. Obviously, some of the prisoners are people who truly went above and beyond in terms of sheer amount of evil in their crimes, but the more you realize that that isn't even close to the majority of prisoners, the more inhumane and unjustified the conditions begin to seem. In addition to housing prisoners, TAMS also had an execution chamber. This is where people would stand, behind double-sided glass, experiencing their last moments on Earth. On the other side of the glass, people would stand and watch the execution happen from the bleachers. Regardless of your opinion on the death penalty, I don't think it's healthy for someone to see the light leave someone's eyes. I've seen people die before, and it's just not something you want to experience in any capacity. Being in these rooms felt weird, and the air was heavy. On December 28, 2012, TAMS shut its doors for good. Like the initial opponents of TAMS had pointed out, this prison was causing the state of Illinois to bleed money, and there were severe human rights violations. It has been proven time and time again that punishment over reformation often costs taxpayers money, and so does the death penalty. The death penalty is often more costly for us than life in prison. I know, it seems counterintuitive since you'd think housing someone for decades would be cheaper than getting rid of them, so to speak, but that's just not the case. Let me explain. The sheer amount of legal costs, pretrial costs, jury selection, trial, incarceration, while things take years or even decades to go through, and appeals, and all of that are so much more expensive than feeding people slop and having them sleep on concrete. On average, it costs an extra $1 million per prisoner to invoke the death penalty than to take care of someone with a life sentence with no chance of parole. In addition to this, the death penalty does not deter crime any more than life in prison. The death penalty, however, is only one of the many problems with TAMS economically. TAMS was shown to be the least cost-effective facility in the entire state, wasting millions of taxpayer dollars. Solitary confinement is the most expensive form of incarceration. I mean, from a sheer space aspect to the aspect of having to deal with all the prisoners one by one on an individual basis, thus needing more staff at the facility itself. It's not cost effective, and it doesn't really have any benefits for broader society. Speaking of issues with solitary confinement, it has been proven to be psychologically damaging, especially amongst persons that are already severely mentally ill. If some of these prisoners are not going to be imprisoned forever, they are at a massive disadvantage when attempting to reintegrate into society, as they are now likely to be even more mentally ill than they were when they entered the facility, and possibly, as a byproduct of that, more dangerous as well. There are many allegations and recorded instances of abuse within the prison as well. Some prisoners were quite literally tortured, and for seemingly no reason. Sensory deprivation, unclean facilities, assaults, and other atrocities were commonplace within the prison. The sensory deprivation caused many prisoners to make attempts on their lives, harm themselves, or even smear poop on the walls because their brains were just that broken from it. The American Psychological Association has said mentally ill prisoners should not be placed in solitary confinement, and yet that's exactly what was happening at TAMS. A combination of economic drain, inhumane conditions, and an overall shift in public sentiment against solitary Supermax prisons like TAMS led to its closure and the closure of many facilities like it. So what happened to the prisoners when TAMS shut down, and what happened to the building today? The extra funds actually went to CPS to help children in danger, an arguably better use of taxpayer dollars than contributing to human rights violations. The prisoners themselves were transferred to various other prisons, primarily Pontiac Correctional Center. The last 5 transfers were made, as I said before, on December 28th of 2012. Despite escaping TAMS, prisoners were often left with lifelong trauma. One prisoner, named Brian Nelson, had the following to say about his experience at TAMS. The effects of the 12 years I spent at TAMS are always with me, like a dark cloud hovering over my head. Not a day goes by that I don't fall backwards into that gray box, now knowing that it sits empty, torturing itself and the captors that held us there, that wanted to keep it open. Strangely, now TAMS tortures them. Nobody that ever spent time in solitary is ever the same. Working at the Uptown People's Law Center, we now have federal educators ruling that men released from TAMS are mentally disabled and cannot work. These men are now being awarded disability benefits due to the serious mental illness caused by the time that they spent in TAMS. Ironic that the state is now creating dungeons that destroys the mental well-being of its wards. Where is the justice in this, or the rehabilitation? Solitary confinement needs to be outlawed worldwide for humanitarian reasons. I will never be the same or normal to the point that TAMS leaves me alone for an entire day, and I have been physically out of solitary for 31 months, yet not a single day mentally have I been free from it. Thankfully, there were some prisoners that were interviewed after being transferred to Pontiac, and they expressed great relief for the transfer and gratitude for finally being in a humane facility for the first time in a long time. They claim the warden is much kinder and values their well-being at the new facility. So, what about the facility itself? Surely it's been demolished or repurposed, right? Well, if that were the case, I wouldn't have been able to make this video. There have been lots of talks about repurposing the facility since its closure, but nothing has really gone through. The several smaller buildings are used for storage for the FBI and local police, at least as of 2025. The Supermax itself is currently being slowly but surely taken apart. Some things like the staircases and other small things have been taken, and the entire second floor, which was just grates where the guards walked above the prisoners to and from control rooms and other places, are entirely removed, aside the ones that led to several of the control rooms. The building is still powered, but it's covered in mold and dead animals. They left behind some expensive equipment, such as some of the medical devices you see here, and even the security TVs were still left on, but they're too damaged to see anything properly with. Given the unique structure of the building, it's hard to see what it could be repurposed for other than another inhumane prison. It's likely that they can't be asked to demolish the facility because it's in the middle of nowhere and the land probably isn't particularly valuable. It would likely cost more to demolish the facility than to just let it rot like they are now. A decent amount of urban explorers who have been to the site have found themselves confronted by federal agents with guns, so it's likely still being used in some capacity for some type of government purpose that we as civilians just don't have the clearance to know about. There are still law enforcement officers that actively patrol both inside and outside the facility to this very day, but this time it seems they're not trying to keep people in, they're trying to keep them out. It's hard to say what's going to come of this place. They're actively removing things such as staircases as recently as several months ago, but nobody really seems to know why. The damage that was caused by TAMS will never fade. Scars remain even if just in the background. But what can we learn from this failure of a program? Well, clearly several things. The first being that the average civilian hasn't the slightest idea of what lands somebody in a Supermax, and that they don't deserve that. Civilians think of things like serial killers when they hear the term Supermax. As a whole, our country has a vastly higher incarceration rate than most other countries, and yet we don't seem to be reducing crime. We're spending all of our resources on locking people up, and none of them on how to reintegrate them into society and lower the recidivism rate. It's proven time and time again, punishment is not effective, rehabilitation is. Notice how much safer Norway seems than the USA? The country that is more focused on rehabilitation and release than making prisoners suffer? Hey, I'm not saying we gotta be the softest country out there, but we really should re-examine our goals. Our goals should be to reduce crime, not get revenge. America is a very emotional country. We focus on things like fear and vengeance instead of mechanically solving our problems. We're the loud and annoying little brother of the world. We have so much potential, but we're so caught up in our feelings that we're holding ourselves down. Our politics should scare you, and our justice system should scare you. Nothing is clean from emotional and financial poisoning. The line between criminal and upstanding is much thinner than you may believe. So take some time away from your preconceived notions and get to know a person, get to know a group, get to know a thing before you make your mind up on it all, or all you'll ever be is mindless. Life is not as simple as you'd like it to be. You can't know things for certain. Ever. Life is messy and complicated, and that's what makes it worth living. Stop living in a tar pit of anecdotes and rules and join the real world. Open yourself up to every idea, because then you open yourself up to every possibility. You never know what you truly want or feel until you let go. I've linked several sources in the description that helped me make this video. Feel free to give them a look if you'd like more information. I'd also like to address the people watching who'd like to explore this location. Do not! Everyone who's gone here successfully went years ago before the FBI started clearing things out and using it for God knows what. It is patrolled 24/7, 365 days a year. This place has been cooked for a long time, and you do not want to end up staying somewhere like this. That's why I also feel comfortable naming the place, because I know nobody can get in anymore. And everybody already kind of knows where this is. So it doesn't matter. That being said, I'm back. I've returned to YouTube. I'm going to be making Urbex content now, doing things and going places you've never seen before, and putting my life on the line to show you things you'd never see otherwise. So, hey, if you like that, leave a like, subscribe with notifications on, and I will catch you on the flip side.
Early in the morning, it was was dark, I was the only one, I was alone. The loneliness my trademark, I had the worst night. Had a dream that I was dying and the sweat was in my eyes. I'm getting the feeling, undenying whatever happened. My mind is such a mess, I have a feeling I've been sleeping less and easing into dreaminess. A fever is upon me, I'm seizing up the moment. Best accept that I have shown for all the things I do with you. I know I go alone. If I try to make some time, so one day you can see, I'll go from where I'm standing now to where I'm supposed